Hello everyone, and welcome to the complete tour of what turned into a kind of Victorian era farmstead build, which you just got a glimpse of in that opening montage. Quick note, this tour will only cover the things I did to the landscape around my Victorian house, which is always the final step to my build process. If I'm quite honest, it's sometimes my favorite part to work on. Landscaping is the part that ties your build to the world around it, giving your build a story and purpose in the world. But if you want to see my process for building the house itself, you'll have to check out my previous video called 10 Steps to Build Your Very Own Victorian House, which I will link in the description below. As the title implies, that video not only covers the making of this house, but also covers 10 steps that you can take to design your very own Victorian style house. If you haven't watched that video first, don't worry, it's not at all necessary to enjoy this video, so feel free to stay right here as we get into it right now. I want to start the tour by showing an overhead aerial view so we can see everything all at once. Obviously, we've got our house in the middle, in the center. It is the centerpiece. This is the build that we were working with here, and I'm just doing the landscaping around it. And we have these nice big sections to the right and to the left. And off to the right here, you can see I put in a little tree farm, trying to do something a little unique, a little different. And to the left, we have this kind of walk-in garden. Became like a little bee atrium hybrid. And then we zoom back up. Over here in the back, we have the main farm. We are in the plains, so we need our barley and our flax farm, and this whole big plateau up here is what I envision to be the big main farm. Now, the last little garden is what you see right here, and this is just a little side garden. I had a little bit of extra space to work with, so I wanted to throw down, a regular little vegetable garden, and then you can run into that right when you exit the back door of the house. Now, in addition to all of that, we've got a couple structures, and structures really help bring your space to life as well and tie everything together. At the bottom of the barley farm, I put in some windmills to process, and we'll take a look at those a little bit later. We threw a barn in the back to really give it a whole farm feel. And the very last thing is we added this little stable workstation area, which I kind of turned into a chicken coop. And our chickens are running in place there, so they're just having a good time, enjoying the weather. But it all really started, if I can control my camera, back here at the beginning, at this little road. This was the first thing that I built. It was the first vision I had, and I had a vision in my mind, just with a little roadway with kind of nice evenly landscaped trees on either side, to the left and the right. And let's get out of free fly mode, put our UI back up, and we're back in business. We're in the game. So there's a few things I want to talk about here to you guys, and I'm going to structure this tour in a kind of similar way that I structure my 10 steps videos, which is half showing off my build, but also largely it's not all about me. I hope that my build can inspire you guys and kind of teach you guys some ways that so you guys can build your own awesome creations. So I always kind of give my tours and talk through my stuff with this kind of teaching mindset in mind. So with that, I want to mention 3 things here. Lesson number 1 is always look for inspiration. I'm always trying to find inspiration from elsewhere. And I'll talk about where the inspiration for this came from in a second. Lesson number 2 is iterate. Things are never built perfectly the first time, at least for me they're not. I go through countless iterations, and I'll explain some of that, what I did with this road as well. And the last thing is, maybe this is more of just the way it kind of happens for me, but is allow your ideas to build off of each other. For me, one thing often kind of leads to another. It started with this road, and then I was like, okay, and then I added this little entrance, and then because I had created this fence here, which was the first time I created this fence, and I had this little border over here, I'm like, let me just continue to use that fence. So that idea that I used here became reused here, and then that kind of became a motif, and you can see the same kind of fence being used all throughout the property, and it really kind of helps tie the whole thing together and bring it all together. So those are my 3 little lessons, if I if I fancy myself a teacher here in any way. All right, but to go through this part, where did the inspiration for this come from? It actually came from, well, there's a couple real life locations that I had in mind. So I was, for real world is the best spot for inspiration. But there's also another video game that really made this become what it did, and that is Red Dead Redemption 2, if any of you guys have played that awesome game. There is this place there, and I'll throw some screenshots up on the screen, called Braithwaite Manor, and it's a really long road, probably like this long from here to the house. And there's just plantations on all sides. The game world is huge and massive and beautiful. And when I looked that screenshot up, here's where I'm going to talk about iteration as well, and I'm going to try to make this brief because we don't want to spend too much time just talking about this entryway. You guys are probably done looking at that right now. When I first made this road, I made it somewhere about this length, about 4 meters in length, the length of 2 staircases. And it's like, why do you ever need a road that's wider than 4 meters in length? Like 4 meter as a road seems like a very large road. So that's how I made it to begin. And I was building the fence along the side here. And initially I was just using things like thin materials, like these dividers, because your fences, you would expect them to be pretty thin. You have your dividers here, you have the diverger, metal walls, you have cages. Those can all, you can make little darkwood fences with cages and stuff like this. Like that makes a nice little fence right there. But you typically use thin materials for fencing. And then I built some trees on either side, and it really just felt a little too closed in. I wasn't quite happy with it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly. So that's when the idea for Braithwaite Manor came in, and I looked up some screenshots, and then I noticed a few details. One being, you see this brown spot right here. It's like the cobblestone. The road goes in the middle, but it doesn't sit flush to the fence. There's this kind of natural organic feel to the fence in that screenshot that I saw that made it seem like the grass on the other side was kind of encroaching in on the fence. There's a little bit of dirt and there's a little bit of this natural overgrown feel. And so that was the first thing that I tried to do. Now, in order to even do that in this game, when you start using your paved roads, they take up quite a large area left and right. You can't do your tiny little paved roads like this Pathan thing is here. So in order to achieve that kind of effect, I needed to widen it. So after I widened it, I had the thought really to kind of, let me try to build my own fence. And that's when I came up with this kind of traditional farm looking fence. And it was really as simple as just kind of, you plant a vertical post anywhere, and then you can take like a horizontal post and just holding shift and laminate. You actually don't even have to hold shift, and laminate it to the size, snap, and kind of keep snapping. And then you just, every 2 beams, I just added another vertical post, and I continued that all the way down. And then I wanted to get kind of an edge trim to it, so you have to do something like that and then throw your bottom back down. A lot of shift holding, but it's a manual fence. So this is part of the iteration process I was talking about. Once I came up with this, I was like, this works. I really like this. But I think these fences only worked and looked good because of how wide the road became. And it was all due to that inspiration piece that I used. And the reason these beams typically don't work as a fence, I think, at least in my opinion, is because they're so thick. In terms of real world dimensions, they're maybe 6 inches by 6 inches by the 2 meters. These are beams that you would more commonly probably use as the rafters inside your house to hold up the entire second floor. But anyway, getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, and that was the inspiration for this whole driveway, and once I've built it out, I widened it. I added like this kind of the cool plains grass coming through the fence, and I created my custom fence, and then I put the landscaping trees on the other side and the bushes. I was in love with it. I thought it looked perfect. Quick note here, if you've been on my channel before, you'll notice my landscaping. I will call out the mod that I use for that. It's a really simple mod. You probably see a ton of other builders on YouTube using the same mod. It's called Plant Everything. It just adds the assets that already exist in the game to the cultivator. So like these are the plains bushes that you always see in the plains. Now it just allows you to spend 3 wood and build them. And the coolest piece, of course, are the vines. And that brings us to our little entryway here. So we're on this flat ground here, and as we move up, our house exists on a slightly higher plane, which I created an entrance with some stairs. It's always a nice little thing to do to give your like the entrance to your property, like make it feel grand, make it feel like you're crossing a border and entering the property. And then I just added this nice little pergola situation up here, which are just a bunch of little 1 meter beams, and they always snap in. You can do this in a variety of different ways. You can make it, I think I saw like JJ the Builder do a really cool one recently, and it was more 3-dimensional. It comes up, and I think there was like a layer of depth and thickness to the top of it, and he did some cool things there as well. I just kept it simple as far as this one goes, but of course added our vines, and the vines really kind of just, when you're doing landscaping and you're gardening and you're trying to tie your build into the environment around it, like nothing accomplishes that better than the vines, in my opinion. So you can just take your vine, toss it on there anyway. It works just like any cultivator or build piece, and then you can destroy it. So that is the story of the beginning of the build with our awesome little entry road. Nice little long walk or drive with your cart up the road, and then you come upon the farmstead. All right, and here we have our general landscaping tips, which is a simple 1 meter beam. You curve it out, just one rotation. Just always do one rotation in between every one to kind of create that nice smooth curve, and come up with little circular shapes that kind of fit your area around the house. Here I was working with the curve of my porch just to kind of add a little garden in front of the porch. And then on this side of the house, I just did some, grass and the bushes on the sides. And then I did another little curved garden in the back by my chimney before we come out the back entrance. And then just a couple general bushes there. You don't pick and choose. You don't have to do garden everywhere. You could do garden all around your house. It is your world to play with. This is what I ended up on going with. Coming over to this side, I'll zoom back up just a little bit. We got our little tree farm. So as I was thinking about when it became clear I was turning this into a farm, I had this huge space back here, which I knew this gigantic plateau is going to be the main plains farm, which of course contains your flax and your barley, and then anything else, your other main gardens. I carved a little section there for onions. But I was like, all right, what do I do with this giant field over here to the right of my house? And then what do I do with the other spaces around my house? So this was actually one of the first areas I built up. I had, as I had already described, I carved it off with my fence. So that was kind of the first step, was just kind of, let's just define the space we're working with. Like, how big is this area going to be? So I gave it a back with the fence here. And then I can see clearly what I'm working with here, and I knew I wanted my main garden, my main farm to be up there, so I wanted to do something different here. I didn't just want to plant more flax or barley or make this barley and that flax. So I had the thought, like, hey, Christmas tree farm or any kind of tree farm, that is just a different type of thing, and I hadn't seen it done in Valheim before, but that's a type of farm, orchards that exists. So I was just trying to add a little bit of variety. So again, using the same Plant Everything mod, it does allow you to plant these small fir trees just like this, boom. So I kind of lined them up, and I did go through the effort of cultivating. I think I cultivated all of it, and then with the hoe, I pathened out in between. So if you look carefully, you can actually see it. There's still a small strip of cultivated soil going down, just to kind of give it a little bit of order and uniformity to it. And I just planted a couple rows of beech trees, and I thought the firs looked especially good, so I did use more of those than the beech trees. But and that was great. That filled up this entire section over here. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, coming around the back, let's head up to the main section of the farm. And you can see it from up here. I'm just going to go into fly mode so we can do this a little bit more quickly. We had a big area to work with. I'm saying we because I always talk as if we're building together. But this is my build, and I had a large plateau to work with here. And I was envisioning from the start that this whole section was going to be the main farm. Now, originally, I was imagining all of this land would just be farm. Now, you know, it gets a little redundant and boring after a while, so I'm always trying to think, what can I do to add a little bit of personality to my area? And here's where we arrive at a crucial turning point in the story of how this build came to pass. I was done with my house and I was ready to release my video, and I kind of just wanted to get to that phase of it, but I wanted to touch up the land around it, and I had a lot of land to work with here. And then I wasn't feeling putting together this whole farm and just planting a whole bunch of stuff and just, you know, building out just a huge stretch of farmland. And then I had a thought. I remembered a barn that I had built a long time ago. In fact, my very first server, the very first shared server, back when Valheim first released. I think I started playing this game maybe 2 or 3 weeks after it had released. I was enthralled by building from the start. My friends were going off and they were hunting bone mass and they were adventuring, and I occasionally joined them, but I was mostly back at our Meadows base just playing around with the building. And my friends, what you are looking at here is my very first build that I ever built in Valheim. And how did I get this here, you ask? That existed on a server that I had not been to in probably a year and a half. This was a long forgotten barn that I had built, I put together. Now, I had the thought, do I want to just recreate that barn? It's not a difficult build to put together, but I'm like, again, I was kind of done and I just wanted to like accelerate this process. And then I remembered, and this is where I'm going to talk about another mod. Now, this mod is not necessary to build any of this, so it's not a required mod, but this mod is a extraordinarily useful mod if you are a builder like me. And it is called PlanBuild, and it is this little blueprint rune you see up here in my toolbar. You might have been wondering, what is that? Well, that's what allows me, or it helps me at least, build these 10-step videos where I show 10 versions of the house, and it evolves one step at a time over and over and over again. And you can see it kind of shrinking into smaller stages of itself. Change the balcony up here. I'm going to fly back over to our main farm. But what this mod does, and I will pull up the blueprint rune in a second, is it allows you to make a blueprint of one of your builds. And I'll pull it up, and I have a lot of my houses saved. This is my Meadows house. We got my stone houses, and it literally allows you to save a blueprint of the version of the house, and you can raise it and lower it, and then hold control, boom, and drop it on there. And this was one of the early versions of the stone house that I was building for my other build here. Now I can undo that with the click of a button. Boom, gone, removed the 833 pieces that are a part of that. If I want to drop one of the more final versions of that same stone house, raise it up a little bit. There's a bunch of key bindings involved in that. Looks like all of the pieces did not come to that, or this is an iterated version of it. But yeah, you can see how easy that is. So I had the thought, let me go back to that saved world. Let me find my very first barn build. And guys, let me just tell you, it's a simple thing. It's just a little barn. It doesn't follow any of the steps that I recommend, like overhanging your roofs. I mean, a barn doesn't have an overhang roof. Everything's flush. The window slits are so basic. But it made me so happy to see this old build. I don't know how you guys feel about a lot of your builds, but like, it's a journey down memory lane, and you can see like your old beginnings. My little hayloft here, and I got the little cross beams that I wanted to make it feel like it's naturally supported, like a little bit realistic from a physics standpoint or design standpoint. Little stables, and the doors half sunken down. Little breeding stables over here. Let me shut that so the board doesn't come out. It was so nice and cool to like revisit one of my old builds, and that's why I can't recommend this mod enough. If you're a big builder, if you're really into building in Valheim, and at this point in your Valheim career, maybe you've built a bunch of stuff, it allows you, it basically turns a lot of your little buildings and structures into assets that you can use. They become building pieces, building blocks that you can use to help populate your new areas. Like, I can take a blueprint of this shed right here. You can go back to the blueprints page, or the main tool page, wherever that is. Right here. Create new blueprint. Things seem to be a little buggy right now. Here we go. This is what it looks like. You create a little blueprint just like this. All of those are selected. We'd call it little wood shed, save it to blueprints, save, and now we can come over here, go to our blueprints. Here's our little wood shed. Go back to it, little wood shed, lower it, and there we go. Now we have it over here. It's really as easy as that. It's a little high, so you have to mess with like the heights and whatnot, and I'll get rid of it. But how fun is that as a builder? Sorry, this has turned into like a big mod showcase, but I'm just trying to tell the story of how this build came to pass. And it started really up here with me bringing my old best friend the barn in, and I dropped it over there. And then after I did that, I was so happy, and like I was kind of nostalgic and reminiscent. And then I was back in the build. I was like, let me build this farm, let me build this farmland. And I fleshed it out here, and because this barn exists with the stable here and this kind of L shape, that is what naturally informed the shape of like the road here, and that's why I built this fence and this farm in the shape that I did. It all kind of took shape from there. So I had the back door of the house here, and we needed to make some steps to get up to this area, so I did that, and then I kind of wrapped around a back road to lead down to the front of the barn, and then the farm here became like this little L shape to allow for this space in the road. And then just had this little spot up here, and I think I iterated with a few different things, and ultimately went with the giant oak tree. And this bad boy turned into a monster when he grew. I was like, this is the biggest oak tree that I think exists in the game. I actually, to tell you guys how meticulous I am, I planted this 3 times and waited for it to grow, 3 separate times. And first time it was too small. Second time it was big like this, but this branch was hanging out over the barn. It was like hanging out over here, and it was creating like way too much shade and shelter, and it just wasn't working. So I chopped it down, and then I planted again, and eventually it grew into something that I was happy with. But just to continue the plan build conversation, these guys here are from another shared server that I had built on one of my friend's little bases, farms. He had like a tiny little farm in the back of his main house, and it was like on a corner. So I kind of catty cornered this there to kind of have these built-in windmills that they're totally functional. You can walk up here, and you can walk up the middle, and from the middle, start processing barley there, start processing barley there, let them process, and then walk around and go collect your barley, and then you can just kind of dump them into the chest here. A little bit of storage underneath. Yeah, I like taking things like windmills and that have a function in the game, and kind of like building a little design around it that makes it just a little bit prettier, brush it up, and then blend it in to make it a part of the environment. And it took me a while to find a good spot for these guys because they were a fixed size, and I wanted to just use PlanBuild to drop them in perfectly. But this spot ended up on working really well. Where these exist on the other server, there's actually water all around here, so that's why they're kind of towers that are like sitting out of the water. They're jutting out. And then the last one, I was in it at that point. So the last one I did was this was on that same server, I believe, still my shared server, and this is just as part of our Meadows base. After we had gotten to the plains and I got dark wood and whatnot, I went back to the Meadows base and I built this little, I think I was experimenting. It was shortly after Hearth and Home had released, so it was a cool new thing to be building with the dark wood roofs. And then I think I saw, again, be inspired by others, I saw another builder do this concept where they do the windmill in the roof. So I wanted to try my own version of that. So this was my attempt here. It's just a very simple little build. You can walk in here. It's just a little shed. I don't have anything in here, but it's just a little storage place with a windmill and little workbench and a garden in the back and a little stable. And this, just like on my shared server, was built on a hill. So I built it with this wall right here. It's intended to exist on a hill where down here is the bottom of the hill and up here is the top of the hill. So that's something that from a landscaping perspective, I can't encourage everybody enough to just work with the natural lay of the land and kind of build your buildings into it, because that ends up on achieving such a cool natural feel and look to it, rather than just flattening everything and then just building on a flat ground. So yeah, that is the major story of how one thing kind of led to another, and it's all thanks to that mod. Now again, mod absolutely not necessary for any of this. I could have just rebuilt the same structures again. I could have just referenced screenshots, or I could have just done different versions of the same kind of buildings. But that was the catalyst that really helped me push through this build and turn it into what it became. And I gotta tell you, like, I had so much fun doing it. It really reinvigorated me. Yeah, and with that, that's kind of the full story of everything you see here. You see all those buildings, you see the parts, and it's just a matter of like creating the right paths and trying to connect things, and everything kind of informs everything else. Like I said before, the fact that that barn is back there in the shape that it was, and the fact that the door to get into the back door of this house is over here, I needed to kind of create a path, and that's what informed the shape of this barn here. And then I always try to add a little bit of personality, so I kind of created this little corral area at the entrance of the farm where maybe you'd have some things stormed. These guys here are actually another mod that I had never used before, but I was building a farm, so I heard of a mod called, I don't know, it might be Valheim Farm. Don't quote me on that. I still never really use it. These are the only things I did, but it just it allows you to turn the way you can make wood, stacks of wood, 50 wood equal this. It allows you to make stacks of everything else, stacks of Jotun puffs, a little basket of Jotun puffs, stacks of fish for fish barrel, and the same thing for the barley and the flax. It allows you to create those little barrels. I feel like it's probably like crates, Valheim crates or something, but feel free to look that one up if you think that's cool. It's just a fun little fixture. Yeah, and then this was the last area. I wanted beehives somewhere, and I was just experimenting with tossing them on different leveled poles, and then the little tiny fir trees. I think that looks really natural. And then I just created a little stone walking path through there, and it ends up on being like a kind of nice little area. Let's make it nighttime, little avatar feel. Got the nice little cool mood lighting. Again, plant everything, allows you to plant thistle, and you can always plant your carrots and other stuff. Yeah. Yeah, that I believe concludes the tour of just about everything. See your little farm at night, and now that I'm up here, I haven't been over here. I haven't done this at nighttime yet. I can see that I would want to probably add some torches, just a little bit of night light, and you don't want to put torches or fires near your boar. I'll say you can't tame them there, but yeah. All right, thank you guys so much for journeying through the story, really, of the developments of my farmstead build. Thank you guys for watching, as always, and see you soon.